Jake Morrison sat in the back row of the xenobiology classroom, his pen moving across the tablet screen as he took notes. The morning light from the artificial sun streamed through the massive windows of Galactic University Station Minerva. Around him, 23 other students filled the curved rows of seats, but Jake was the only human among them. To his left sat Kira, an Altarian whose body looked like it was made of living crystal. Her skin caught the light and threw rainbow patterns on the walls when she moved. She was always careful not to bump into anyone because her crystalline edges could cut. Her people came from a world of caves and gentle winds where fighting never happened. In front of Jake, two Verdanian students whispered to each other in their plant-like way. Their green skin had bark-like patterns and small flowers bloomed along their arms when they felt happy. They moved slowly and ate only sunlight and water. Violence was impossible for their kind because they felt pain when any living thing got hurt. Near the front, a group of Zephyrian students sat together. They looked like birds but walked on two legs and had hands instead of wings. Their feathers changed colors with their moods. Right now they showed calm blue and green shades. These bird people came from a world of floating islands where predators could not reach them. They had never learned to fight because they never needed to. Professor Kelthera stood at the front of the class. She was tall and thin like smoke, her body seeming to shift between solid and gas. The ethereals were ancient and wise, and they had given up physical form long ago. They spent their time thinking and learning, never knowing anger or fear. Today we will study how different worlds shape their children, the professor said, her voice like wind through leaves. Each species carries the mark of their home planet. The gentle worlds make gentle people. The harsh worlds make strong people. But the truly dangerous worlds make something else entirely. Jake wrote down her words, but he had heard this lesson before. He knew what came next. Class 1 through 5 worlds are safe and easy, Professor Kelthera continued. Most of you come from these worlds. Class 6 through 10 worlds have some dangers, but thinking beings can live there without too much trouble. Class 11 worlds are very dangerous, and only the strongest species survive there. Kira raised her crystal hand. What about Class 12 worlds, Professor? Do any thinking beings actually come from those? The professor paused. Jake felt several students turn to look at him, then quickly look away. Everyone knew he came from Earth, but most of them tried not to think about what that meant. Class 12 worlds are called Deathworlds, Professor Kelthera said slowly. They are so dangerous that most scientists believe no thinking life could evolve there. The worlds are full of predators, diseases, natural disasters, and deadly weather. Everything on such worlds exists to kill everything else. But Professor, said Vera, one of the Verdanians, if such worlds exist, how could anyone survive there long enough to become smart? Jake kept writing, but he could feel the weight of curious eyes on him. This happened every time the class talked about world classification. His classmates knew the answer to Vera's question, but they did not want to say it out loud. Well, Professor Kelthera said, the only way to survive a death world is to become more dangerous than everything else on it. The thinking beings who evolve there must become perfect killers. The classroom fell quiet. Jake continued taking notes as if the professor was talking about the weather. Are there really people from Class 12 worlds? Asked Chen, a Zephyrian student. His feathers had turned pale yellow with nervousness. There are rumors, the professor said. Stories about beings called humans who come from a world called Earth. But these are probably just tales to scare children. No one has ever proven such beings exist. Jake almost smiled at that. He had been attending this university for 4 months now, sitting in classes, eating in the cafeteria, and living in the dorms like any other student. Yet even his professor, who saw him every day, could not quite believe what he was. What would such beings be like? Kira asked, her crystal body dimming with fear. The stories say they are hunters who can track prey across vast distances, Professor Kelthera said. They supposedly never give up once they start hunting something. They can go without food or water for days. They feel no fear and show no mercy. They can kill with their bare hands or with simple tools. Most frightening of all, they are said to hunt in groups, working together to bring down creatures much larger than themselves. Several students shivered. The Zephyrian's feathers turned dark gray and the Verdanian's flowers closed up tight. But these are just stories, the professor added quickly. No such beings could really exist. They would be too dangerous to be allowed into civilized space. Jake finished writing his notes and looked up at the clock. Still 30 minutes left. In class. He had learned long ago to sit quietly during these discussions. When he first arrived at the university, he had tried to correct the misconceptions about humans. That had not gone well. His classmates had been so terrified that 3 of them transferred to other schools. Now he just listened and said nothing. It was easier that way. His teachers and classmates could pretend he was just another student, maybe a little quiet, maybe a little different, but not really dangerous. They could ignore the way he never seemed startled by loud noises. They could pretend not to notice how his eyes tracked movement across the room. They could forget that he came from Earth. The important thing to remember, Professor Kelthera was saying, is that evolution shapes behavior as much as body structure. Prey species learn to run and hide. Predator species learn to hunt and kill. This is why we have such a peaceful galaxy. Most thinking species evolved from creatures that ate plants or small insects. They learned cooperation instead of competition. Jake nodded along with the other students. It made sense. Most of his classmates came from worlds where the biggest danger was maybe falling off a cliff or getting caught in a rainstorm. They had never needed to develop the instincts that humans took for granted. The class continued with Professor Kelthera, showing pictures of different species and their homeworlds. Jake found it interesting to see how each race reflected their environment. The Altarians' crystal skin protected them from their world's harsh underground conditions. The Verdanians' plant-like nature let them survive on their peaceful garden world. The Zephyrians' hollow bones and colorful feathers helped them live on their sky islands. When the professor showed a picture of a green and blue world covered in oceans and continents, Jake recognized Earth immediately. But Professor Kelthera labeled it as an uninhabited death world and moved on quickly. As the class period ended, students began packing their things. Jake closed his tablet and put his pen away. Around him, his classmates chatted about their next classes or weekend plans. A few nodded at him politely, but none tried to start conversations. Jake had gotten used to being friendly but distant. He walked toward the door with the flow of students. Tomorrow they would have another lesson, probably about peaceful trade relationships between species or the importance of galactic cooperation. Jake would sit in his usual seat, take his notes, and say nothing when the topic of death worlds came up. It was a comfortable routine. His classmates felt safe, his professors could maintain their beliefs about the nature of civilized space, and Jake could focus on his studies. Everyone was happy with the arrangement. As he stepped into the hallway, Jake had no idea that tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, someone would come to their classroom who had never learned the careful politeness that kept galactic society running smoothly. Tomorrow, Jake would have to choose between maintaining his quiet disguise and showing his classmates what a human really was. The next morning started like any other day. Jake walked into the xenobiology classroom and took his usual seat in the back row. Kira was already there, her crystal body catching the morning light. The Verdanian students were in their spots near the front, small flowers blooming along their arms as they discussed their homework. The Zephyrians sat together as always, their feathers showing calm morning colors of soft blue and yellow. Professor Kelthara entered the room carrying her data pad and a collection of specimen containers. Today's lesson was supposed to be about symbiotic relationships between species. Jake had read the assignment and found it interesting how different creatures learn to help each other survive. "Good morning, class," Professor Kelthera said, as she set up her materials. "Today we will examine how cooperation evolved as a survival strategy. When creatures work together, they can overcome challenges that would destroy them individually." The students settled into their seats and pulled out their tablets. Jake opened his note-taking app and waited for the lesson to begin. Everything felt normal and peaceful, just like every other day for the past 4 months. Professor Kelthera activated the large display screen at the front of the room. Images of different species working together appeared, fish that cleaned parasites off, larger fish, birds that warned grazing animals about predators, plants that shared nutrients through their root systems. Cooperation is the foundation of civilization, the professor continued. When beings learn to help instead of hurt, they can build something greater than themselves. This is how we created our peaceful galactic society. Jake wrote down the key points, but part of his mind wandered. He thought about how humans had also learned cooperation, but in a different way. Humans worked together to hunt. They shared information about prey movements. They coordinated attacks on dangerous animals. But Jake kept these thoughts to himself. 15 minutes into the class, the light suddenly went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in red. An automated voice echoed through the room. Security lockdown initiated. All exits sealed. Please remain calm and stay in your current location. The students looked around in confusion. This had never happened before. Security lockdowns were supposed to be just emergency drills, and those were always announced ahead of time. Everyone stay seated, Professor Kelthera said, though Jake could hear uncertainty in her voice. This is probably just a system malfunction. Heavy, metallic sounds came from the doorway as blast shields dropped into place. The windows darkened as protective barriers slid across them. In seconds, the classroom became a sealed box with no way in or out. Kira's crystal body began to dim with fear. Professor, why would the security system lock us in? I am sure it is nothing serious, Professor Kelthara replied, but she was already moving toward the communication panel on the wall. Let me contact security and find out what is happening. She pressed the emergency button, but no response came. She tried several more times with the same result. The communication system was dead. The Zephyrian students huddled closer together, their feathers turning gray and brown with anxiety. The Verdanians' flowers closed up tight, and their bark-like skin darkened. Even Professor Kelthera's normally calm demeanor showed cracks of worry. Jake remained perfectly still in his seat. His senses had sharpened the moment the lights went out. He could hear his classmates breathing, faster now with fear. He could smell the stress pheromones that several species released when frightened. His eyes adapted quickly to the dim red, lighting taking in every detail of the room. Something was wrong. This was not a malfunction. A new sound reached Jake's ears. Footsteps in the hallway outside, heavy and deliberate. His classmates had not noticed yet, but Jake's hearing was more sensitive than theirs. Someone was approaching the classroom. Two-way, footsteps stopped right outside their door. Jake heard the faint hum of electronic equipment followed by sparking sounds. Someone was cutting through the blast shield. Professor, Jake said quietly. Someone is breaking in. Professor Kelthera turned toward him. What do you mean? Before Jake could answer, a section of the blast shield began to glow orange with heat. Sparks flew as cutting tools sliced through the metal. The acrid smell of melting steel filled the air. Now everyone heard it. The Zephyrians chirped in distress, their feathers turning pure white with terror. Kira's crystal body flickered, like a dying light. The Verdanians pressed themselves against the floor, trying to become as small as possible. Everyone move to the back of the room, Professor Kelthera ordered, her voice tight with fear. The students scrambled from their seats, clustering together as far from the door as possible. Everyone except Jake. He stood up slowly, his movements controlled and precise. While his classmates retreated, Jake stepped forward. Jake, get back here, Kira called out, her voice cracking with panic. Jake did not respond. His attention was focused entirely on the door. The cutting was almost finished. In his mind, he calculated distances, angles, and possibilities. His body felt different now, like a machine switching from rest mode to full power. With a crash, a large section of the blast shield fell inward. Smoke poured through the opening and heavy footsteps echoed as someone stepped into the classroom. The figure that emerged from the smoke was massive. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, covered in dark armor that seemed to absorb the red emergency lighting. Its head was reptilian with yellow eyes that gleamed like hot metal. Spines ran along its back and arms, and its hands ended in claws that could tear through steel. This was a Korathan, one of the few warrior species in the galaxy. They came from a brutal world where only the strongest survived, and they had never learned to live peacefully with others. Most civilized worlds banned them entirely. The Korathan carried weapons that Jake recognized as military grade. A plasma rifle hung across its back, and energy blades were mounted on both arms. This was not some random criminal. This was a professional killer. The creature's yellow eyes swept across the cowering students before settling on Professor Kelthara. Kelthara of the Ethereal Collective, the Korathan said in a voice like grinding stone. I am Vextar of the Korathan clans. You will answer for what you have done. Professor Kelthara stepped forward, though Jake could see her smoke-like body trembling. I do not understand. What do you think I have done? Your research, Vextar snarled, showing rows of sharp teeth. Your paper on optimizing hyperspace routes through unstable stellar regions. Because of your work, the Galactic Council approved a new shipping lane. That lane went directly through Korathan space. The professor's form flickered with confusion. That research was meant to improve trade efficiency. It had nothing to do with military applications. Tell that to the crew of the Bloodclaw, Vextar said, his claws extending with metallic clicks. They were using your recommended route when their ship was destroyed by a stellar flare. 200 Korathan warriors died because of your optimized pathway. Jake understood now. This was revenge. Vextar blamed Professor Kelthara for the deaths of his people, and he had come to collect payment in blood. The students behind Jake whimpered in terror. They had never seen violence before, never been threatened by anything more dangerous than a strong wind or a bright light. They had no idea how to react to a predator, but Jake did. As Vextar advanced toward Professor Kelthara, Jake took another step forward. He was still 20 feet from the Korathan, but his positioning was no accident. He had placed himself between the killer and the others. Vextar noticed the movement and turned his burning eyes toward Jake. You, small one, sit down and be quiet. This does not concern you. Jake did not sit down. Instead, he took another step forward. His classmates stared at him in shock. Why was he not running? Why was he not hiding like everyone else? Jake, no, Kira whispered. Get back here. But Jake was not listening to his classmates anymore. Something had changed in his posture, in his expression, in the way he held himself. The quiet, polite student they had known for months was gone. What stood in his place was something else, entirely. Vextar growled, a sound that made the Zephyrians faint and the Verdanians curl up into tight balls. I said sit down, little creature. I have no quarrel with you. Jake smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that made every prey species in the galaxy feel a cold spike of fear in their hearts. That is where you are wrong, Jake said, his voice calm and steady. You just made it my quarrel. For the first time since entering the classroom, Vextar hesitated. There was something about this small, soft-looking being that did not add up. Where was the fear? Where was the panic? Why did this creature smell like a predator? Jake took another step forward, and Vextar realized, with growing unease, that he might have made a terrible mistake. Jake took another step toward Vextar, and something fundamental shifted in the classroom. The air itself seemed to grow heavier. Behind him, his classmates pressed themselves against the back wall, but their fear was no longer directed only at the armored Korathan. Something about Jake's movement, his posture, his complete lack of fear, triggered instincts they did not even know they had. Kira's crystal body had gone completely dark. The Verdanians were making soft whimpering sounds. The Zephyrians who had not fainted were trembling so hard their feathers fell like snow. You should leave, Jake said conversationally, as if he was discussing the weather. Right now. Walk back through that door and pretend this never happened. Vextar snorted, showing his pointed teeth. You think you can threaten me, soft thing? I am Korathan, I am Apex Predator. I fear nothing. Jake's smile widened slightly. You know what I love about this galaxy? Everyone thinks they know what Dangerous looks like. Big claws, sharp teeth, armor, weapons, all very impressive. He took another step. Vextar was now only 15 feet away, well within the range of the Corathan's weapons. Any sane person would have been running in the opposite direction. But here is the thing about being truly dangerous, Jake continued, his voice never changing from that casual, friendly tone. The most effective predators do not look scary. They look harmless right up until the moment they kill you. Professor Kelthera watched in growing horror. She had seen Jake in class for months, had graded his papers, had watched him interact, politely with other students. This could not be the same being. Vextar activated one of his arm blades. Energy crackled along its edge, hot enough to cut through steel. Last warning, little mammal. Back away or I will cut you down. Jake glanced at the weapon and nodded approvingly. Nice blade. Military grade, plasma edge, probably cost more than most people make in a year. Very intimidating. He looked back up at Vextar's face. You want to know what humans used to hunt with? Sticks. Sharp sticks. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Jake's casual tone made his words more frightening than any roar or threat. We would take a stick, sharpen one end, and use it to kill creatures that were bigger, stronger, and better armed than us. Do you know how we did that? Vextar did not answer. Something about this small creature was very wrong. Its scent was all wrong. Its behavior was all wrong. His instincts were screaming warnings, but he could not understand why. Persistence, Jake said, still walking forward. We would wound our prey with the stick, then follow it. Not fast, just steady. For hours, days, sometimes weeks. We would track it across continents if necessary. We would never stop, never give up, never let it rest. Jake was now only 10 feet away, close enough that Vextar could kill him with a single swipe. But the Corathan found himself taking a step backward. The prey would try to fight us off, but we would just step back and wait. It would run, but we would follow. It would hide, but we would find it. Eventually it would get tired, injured, weak, and then we would move in for the kill. Behind Jake, his classmates watched in absolute terror. This was not the quiet student they knew. This was something else, wearing Jake's face. Professor Kelthera realized with dawning horror that every lesson she had taught about Deathworlds was wrong. She had described them as impossibly dangerous, but she had never understood what that really meant. You know what the scary part is? Jake asked, now only 8 feet from Vexatar. We did not do this for food. We already had food. We did this for fun because we could. Because something about the hunt made us feel alive. Vextar raised his plasma rifle, aiming directly at Jake's chest. Stay back. Jake stopped walking, but did not step away from the weapon. You know what else humans used to hunt? Each other. When we ran out of dangerous animals to kill, we started hunting the most dangerous prey of all, other humans. The words hung in the air like poison. Everyone in the room suddenly understood something that civilized society had tried very hard to forget. Humans had not just survived a death world. They had conquered it so completely that they had to invent new challenges. We got so good at killing our own species that we had to make rules to stop ourselves, Jake continued. We called it warfare, and we turned it into an art form. We learned to kill from far away with projectiles. We learned to kill up close, with blades. We learned to kill silently in the dark. We learned to kill thousands at once with poison and disease. Vextar's rifle was shaking now. This creature in front of him looked so small, so harmless, but everything about its behavior screamed danger. His warrior training told him to attack, but his deeper instincts told him to run. The best part, Jake said, his smile growing wider, is that we never forgot how. Oh, we pretend to be civilized now. We have laws and ethics and social contracts. But underneath all of that, we are still the same persistence hunters who chased mammoths across ice fields. Jake tilted his head slightly, and the gesture was somehow more threatening than any weapon. Would you like to know what I am thinking right now? Vexatar did not answer, but Jake told him anyway. I am thinking about how long it would take me to reach you if I decided to move. I am thinking about which of your weapons I would need to worry about first. I am thinking about 17 different ways to kill you with things I can find in this room." Professor Kelthera made a sound like escaping gas. She finally understood why humans were not welcome in most of civilized space. It was not because they were primitive or violent. It was because they were too good at violence. "Most of all," Jake said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "I am thinking about how much I would enjoy it." That was the moment Vexitar truly understood what he was facing. This was not some random student who had gotten in his way. This was a creature that had evolved for one purpose: to be the perfect killer. Everything else, the politeness, the quiet demeanor, the studious behavior, was just camouflage. Behind Jake, Kira whispered something in her crystalline language. It sounded like a prayer. Jake heard her and glanced back. For just a moment, his expression softened. "Do not worry," he said gently. "I am not going to hurt any of you. You are my friends." When he turned back to Vextar, the Predator's mask was firmly back in place. "But you threatened my friends. That makes you prey." Vextar took another step backward, his weapon still trained on Jake, but his hands were shaking now and everyone could see it. "You cannot be human," Vextar said, his voice cracking slightly. "Humans are myths, stories to frighten children." Jake laughed, and the sound made everyone in the room flinch. "Oh, we are very real. We just let you think we were myths because it made things easier for everyone. But now you have gone and ruined that." He took one more step forward. "The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Vextar's breathing was rapid now, his reptilian chest rising and falling quickly. A predator species himself, he recognized what Jake was doing. This was not just intimidation. This was psychological warfare at its finest. Jake was hunting him. Not with weapons or claws, but with words and presence and the terrible knowledge that somewhere in the galaxy, there were billions more just like him. Jake stood perfectly still for a moment, studying Vextar like a scientist examining an interesting specimen. The Corathan's weapon was still pointed at him, but Jake seemed completely unconcerned by the plasma rifle that could vaporize him in seconds. "You know what your first mistake was?" Jake asked, his voice still carrying that casual, conversational tone that somehow made everything he said more terrifying. "You announced yourself. You told us who you were and why you came here." Vextar's yellow eyes narrowed. "That is honorable combat protocol." "Honorable," Jake repeated, as if tasting the word. "That is your problem right there. You think like a warrior. Warriors have rules, codes, honor, they fight fair." His smile grew cold. "Humans do not fight fair. We fight to win." Behind Jake, his classmates huddled together in absolute silence. Even their breathing seemed too loud in the tense air. Professor Kelthera had backed against the wall, her ethereal form flickering with terror. A human would have studied this classroom for weeks before making a move. Jake continued, beginning to pace slowly back and forth. His movement was predatory, like a big cat sizing up its prey. "We would have learned the schedule, the layout, the security systems. We would have known exactly how many people would be here and what their capabilities were." Vextar tracked Jake's movement with his rifle, but the human was careful to stay just close enough to be threatening without giving the Corathan a clear shot. "A human would have cut the power first, not the communications," Jake said. "Darkness is our friend. We see better in low light than most species. We move quietly. We strike without warning." He paused in his pacing and looked directly at Vextar. "By the time you knew we were there, it would already be too late." The words sank into Vextar's mind like acid. He was beginning to realize that his carefully planned assault had been sloppy by the standards of this creature in front of him. "Your second mistake," Jake continued, "was choosing a single target in a room full of witnesses. Now everyone has seen your face, heard your voice, knows your name. Even if you kill Professor Kelthara, you will have to kill all of us to keep your secret." Vextar's breathing quickened. He had not thought that far ahead. His rage over the death of his clan members had driven him to seek immediate revenge, not to plan for what came after. But that creates a new problem, Jake said, his tone almost sympathetic. Killing a classroom full of students from different species will bring attention. Lots of attention. The kind that gets entire star systems quarantined while authorities hunt for the responsible party. The Corathan's claws clicked nervously against his weapon. Jake was systematically destroying every assumption Vexitar had made about this mission. Your third mistake was the biggest one, Jake said, stopping his pacing and facing Vexitar directly. You assumed everyone in this room was prey. The statement hung in the air like a death sentence. Vexitar suddenly understood that he had walked into a trap, but it was not one that anyone had set for him. He had set it for himself by failing to recognize the true nature of his opposition. Let me tell you what a human would do in your situation, Jake said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. First, I would analyze your equipment. That armor looks impressive, but I can see the joints. Knee, elbow, neck, weak points, where the plating does not overlap. Vexitar glanced down at his armor involuntarily, and Jake's smile widened. Your weapon is designed for long-range combat. In close quarters, it becomes a liability. Too long, too heavy, too slow to track a fast-moving target. The plasma charge needs 2 seconds to build between shots, more than enough time for someone to close the distance. Jake began walking again, but this time his path was bringing him closer to Vexitar with each step. The Corathan tried to adjust his aim, but Jake moved in unpredictable patterns. Your stance tells me you are right-handed, so you will favor attacks from that side. Your breathing is elevated, which means stress is affecting your fine motor control. Your hands are shaking slightly, which will throw off your aim. Each observation was delivered in the same calm, analytical tone, as if Jake was giving a lecture on xenobiology instead of planning a kill. Most importantly, Jake said, now only 6 feet away, you are afraid. Fear makes creatures predictable. When you are afraid, you will either attack or retreat. Since retreating means admitting defeat to prey, you will attack. The question is when. Vexitar's finger tightened on his trigger. Jake was right about everything. The human had read him like an open book. I would guess you will fire in about 3 seconds, Jake said conversationally. Your pride will not let you wait any longer, but your fear is making you hesitate. 3, 2. Vexitar pulled the trigger. The plasma bolt seared through the air where Jake had been standing, but the human was no longer there. He had moved at the exact moment Vexitar committed to the shot, stepping aside with inhuman speed and precision. Before Vexitar could recharge his weapon, Jake was behind him. Too predictable, Jake said softly, close enough that his breath touched the Corathan's neck. Vexitar spun around, swinging his weapon like a club, but Jake had already moved again. The human seemed to flow around the Corathan's attacks like water, always one step ahead, never quite where Vexitar expected him to be. This is what I meant about persistence hunting, Jake said from somewhere in the shadows created by the emergency lighting. We do not need to be stronger than our prey. We just need to be smarter, more patient, more willing to wait for the perfect moment. Vexitar fired again, and again Jake was not there. The plasma bolt scorched the wall where nothing but empty air waited. You are burning through your weapon's power cells, Jake observed. Military-grade plasma rifles carry enough charge for 20 shots. You have used 3, 17 left. At this rate, you will be out of ammunition in less than 5 minutes. The psychological pressure was overwhelming. Vexitar had come here as a hunter, but somehow he had become the hunted. This small, soft creature was systematically dismantling his confidence, his weapons, his entire sense of superiority. The interesting thing about fear, Jake continued, his voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, is that it makes you focus on the immediate threat. You are so worried about where I am right now that you have forgotten about everything else. Vexitar suddenly realized what Jake meant. In his panic, he had turned his back on Professor Kelthara and the other students. Any one of them could have activated an emergency signal or called for help. But when he looked, they were still cowering exactly where he had left them. None of them had moved. They were too terrified to take advantage of his distraction. Oh, they are not going to help, Jake said, reading his thoughts. They are more afraid of me than they are of you now. Congratulations, Vextar. You came here to commit murder, but instead you have given my classmates a demonstration of what humans are really capable of. The truth of those words hit Vexitar like a physical blow. The students were not looking at him with fear anymore. They were looking at Jake. The human had not laid a finger on anyone, had not even raised his voice, but he had terrified an entire classroom more effectively than an armed warrior. So here is what happens next, Jake said, stepping back into the light. He was exactly where he had started, hands at his sides, expression calm and friendly. You are going to leave. You are going to walk out of here, get on whatever ship brought you, and disappear. You are going to forget Professor Kelthara, forget this classroom, and forget you ever met any of us. Vextar stared at him in disbelief. And if I refuse? Jake's smile returned, and this time it was genuine. It was also the most frightening expression anyone in the room had ever seen. Then you get to find out what a human does when someone threatens his friends. The silence stretched between Jake and Vextar like a wire pulled too tight. The Korathan's weapon was still charged and ready, but his hands shook with something that went deeper than fear. It was the recognition that he had made a fundamental error in judgment. You would let me leave? Vextar asked, his voice uncertain. After I came here to kill? Jake shrugged, the gesture so casual it seemed out of place in the tense atmosphere. You have not killed anyone yet. Attempted murder carries a lighter sentence than actual murder. Besides, you are not the first being to make bad decisions when grief clouds their judgment. Professor Kelthara flickered with surprise. Even in this situation, Jake was showing mercy to someone who had threatened her life. But understand this, Jake continued, his voice hardening. This is your only chance. If you stay, if you try to complete your mission, then we stop being civilized. And trust me when I tell you that you do not want to see what humans are like when we stop being civilized. Vextar looked around the classroom. 24 terrified students pressed against the back wall. One professor who could barely maintain her physical form. And one human who had just demonstrated that all of his weapons and armor were useless against a superior predator. For the first time in his adult life, Vextar felt truly defeated. Not by superior firepower or overwhelming numbers, but by something far worse. The certain knowledge that he was outclassed in every way that mattered. How? Vextar asked quietly. How does a species become so dangerous and still pretend to be peaceful? Jake considered the question seriously. We learned that being the best killers in the galaxy means nothing if you kill everyone you might want to talk to. So we decided to be selective about when we hunt. He gestured to his cowering classmates. These people are not my enemies. They are not threats. They are my friends, my teachers, my community. Humans are very good at distinguishing between friend and enemy. We protect our friends with the same intensity that we hunt our enemies. Vexitar slowly lowered his weapon. The fight had gone out of him completely. The deaths of my clan were tragic, Jake said sincerely. Professor Kelthara never intended for anyone to die. Her research was meant to save lives by making space travel safer. Sometimes good intentions lead to bad outcomes. That does not make the professor responsible for your loss. The words were gentle but firm. Jake was offering understanding without accepting blame. My clan demands justice, Vextar said weakly. Your clan deserves justice, Jake agreed. But killing Professor Kelthara will not bring your people back. It will just create more grief for more families. File a formal complaint with the Galactic Council. Demand better safety protocols for hyperspace routes. Make sure this kind of accident never happens again. That would honor your dead much better than revenge. Behind Jake, his classmates watched in amazement. This was the same being who had just reduced a trained warrior to a trembling wreck, but now he was showing compassion and wisdom. Vextar holstered his weapon and deactivated his arm blades. You speak truth, human, but my shame is great. I came here as a warrior and leave as a coward. You came here as someone in pain, Jake corrected. You are leaving as someone who chose wisdom over vengeance. That is not cowardice. That is growth. The Korathan stood silently for a moment, processing everything that had happened. Then he turned to Professor Kelthara. "I offer my regret for frightening you and your students," he said formally. "My grief made me act without honor. I will not trouble you again." Professor Kelthara managed to solidify enough to nod acceptance. "I am sorry for your loss, Vextar. If there is anything I can do to help prevent such accidents in the future, please let me know." Vextar looked at Jake one more time. "What you did today, that was not human behavior. That was something else." Jake smiled, and for the first time all day it looked genuinely friendly. "No, that was exactly human behavior. We just do not show it very often because it scares people." With that, Vextar walked through the hole he had cut in the blast shield and disappeared into the corridor beyond. His heavy footsteps faded into silence, leaving behind a classroom full of shaken students and one very thoughtful professor. Jake turned back to his classmates, his posture immediately relaxing into the familiar, non-threatening stance they remembered. "Is everyone okay?" No one answered. They stared at him as if seeing him for the first time, which in many ways they were. Kira was the first to find her voice. "Jake, what are you?" "I am your classmate," Jake said simply. "I am the same person who helped you with your molecular biology homework last week. I am the same person who shared his lunch with Chen when he forgot to bring credits for the cafeteria. Nothing about me has changed. But the things you said," Vera whispered, her flowers still tightly closed with fear, "were true," Jake admitted. "Humans are dangerous. We evolved on a world that tried to kill us every day for millions of years. We became very good at killing back. But that does not mean we want to hurt anyone. Most humans go their entire lives without harming another thinking being." Professor Kelthara slowly approached, her form more stable now but still flickering with residual fear. "Jake, I need to ask, are there really billions of humans?" "About 8 billion last I heard," Jake confirmed. "Most live on Earth or in the Sol system. A few thousand work in deep space, usually in jobs that other species find too dangerous." The number hung in the air like a weight. 8 billion persistence hunters, scattered across the galaxy. "Why do you hide what you are?" Professor Kelthara asked. Jake sank into his usual seat, suddenly looking tired. "Because of what just happened. The moment people know what humans really are, everything changes. You stop seeing me as Jake, your student. You start seeing me as Jake, the predator who might eat you." He gestured to his classmates, still pressed against the back wall. "Look at them. 20 minutes ago, Kira was asking me to study with her for next week's exam. Chen was planning to invite me to his birthday celebration. Now they can barely stand to be in the same room with me." The truth of his words was evident in every terrified face. "We tried being open about our nature when we first made contact with galactic civilization," Jake continued. "It did not go well. 3 systems quarantined themselves rather than allow human ships to dock. 2 species filed formal complaints claiming we were too dangerous to be allowed in civilized space. 1 government tried to have us classified as a hostile alien threat." Professor Kelthara processed this information. "So you pretend to be harmless." "We do not pretend anything," Jake corrected. "We are harmless, as long as no one threatens us or the people we care about. Today was unusual because someone decided to bring violence into my classroom. That forced me to respond." Jake looked around at his classmates, seeing fear and uncertainty in every face. "I understand if you do not want to be around me anymore. I can transfer to different classes, eat at different times, maybe even transfer to a different university. I do not want any of you to feel unsafe." Slowly, very slowly, Kira stepped away from the wall. Her crystal body was still dim with fear, but she was moving toward Jake rather than away from him. "The homework," she said quietly. Jake looked confused. "What?" "You helped me with molecular biology homework. You spent 3 hours explaining protein structures until I understood them. A predator would not do that." She took another step closer. "You shared your lunch with Chen. You walked Vera to the medical center when she had that allergic reaction to the new fertilizer. You stayed up all night helping the study group prepare for midterms. Other students began to murmur agreement. Despite their fear, they remembered months of kindness and friendship. Those were not the actions of a monster, Kira said, now only a few feet from Jake. Those were the actions of a friend. Jake felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. You are not afraid of me? I am terrified of you, Kira admitted, honestly. But I am more afraid of losing a friend than I am of keeping one who happens to be dangerous. One by one, the other students began to approach. They moved slowly and carefully, but they moved. Chen perched on a nearby desk, still keeping some distance but no longer hiding. Vera and her study partner crept closer, their flowers beginning to open slightly. Can we ask questions? Chen said nervously. Jake nodded. You can ask. I might not answer everything, but I will try to be honest. Are all humans like you? Vera asked. Physically capable of violence? Yes. Willing to use that ability to protect others? Most of us, yes. Actually wanting to hurt people? Very few of us. Professor Kelthera had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement. Jake, would you be willing to give a guest lecture about human biology and psychology? I think it would be valuable for students to learn about your species from someone who actually is human. Jake considered this. That might not be a good idea. The university administration does not know I am human. If they find out, they might ask me to leave. Then we will make sure they do not find out, Professor Kelthera said firmly. What happened here today stays in this room. All of us owe you our lives, and we will keep your secret. The students nodded agreement. They had been through something, together now, something that bonded them in a way that ordinary classroom experience never could. Jake looked around the room at faces that were still scared but no longer hostile. It was not perfect. Things would never be exactly the same.